everybody. It's so lovely to be here with you. So I am joining you from Israel, where Shabbat is fast approaching. The sun is still shining out my window, but I'm going to study Parasha with you, and then not too long after go and light Shabbat candles. And it's so wonderful if you are joining us from the States that you're starting your Friday morning in this way. So when Julie and I decided that I was going to have the privilege of teaching you today, you know, I said Parashat Vaetchanan, which is our parsha for the week. We have the Shema, we have the 10 Commandments. This is the greatest hits of Torah portions, and how awesome, with so much drama in the world, to be able to turn our attention to these huge Jewish themes. You know, maybe we could just sort of give what's going on outside of our window a rest, and spend a half an hour together talking about the luminous, talking about meaning, you know, all of these things, which we are going to do. But then I was speaking to my mom, who I saw is logged in with us. And by the way, it's so wonderful to see your faces. So unless you're like driving in traffic right now or something, if you feel comfortable, turn your camera on. So I was talking to my mom, and she told me that there was an earthquake in LA, where I'm from originally, yesterday. And she said, I think God is really mad. And I felt like, yes, on some level, with everything that is going on in the world, how can we not, on some level, have that reaction of like, I think God is really mad. And once she said that, I realized that we can't shut our windows to what's going on out there, and that really now more than ever we need what we have coming this Shabbat. This Shabbat is called Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort, and the Haftarah that we read is known as the Haftarah of comfort, of drawing comfort. And I thought, you know what? That is really, really where we need to begin. So, Julie, will you reshare the link for us? So, we're gonna copy and paste a link into the chat, and you need to just highlight it and then paste it into a web browser, and you'll get a Safari, a source sheet there that will pop up for you. What's so fun about doing these, about not having handed you a piece of paper with the sources, is that with Safari, you could click on the source and it could take you to the section before or after, because I've excerpted for us sections. I've given you the whole Haftarah, although we're going to just use it as a springboard. And then I've excerpted for us sections from this week's Parasha. Okay, and I just want to share with all of you a little bit of, I'm really happy to be here with you, and I'm especially happy one of my chavrutas is on the call, so I also feel completely amazing. That's so awesome. So hi, Andy. Okay, good. So, can you give me a thumbs up if you have the source sheet open? Are you looking with me at this excerpt from the book of Isaiah? If we really struggle, then I'll share my screen, and you can look from my screen, but then it's just, we see each other less. I can't see you at all. So, some of us are advanced, but I don't even know how to do the digital thumbs up. Okay, so this Shabbat is referred to as Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort, because the opening phrase of the Haftarah that we read says, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. My people, Ami is my people, be comforted. We commemorated yesterday Tisha B'Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, the day when we, first of all, take on a collective communal practice of mourning, and also the day on which a striking number of tragedies have befallen the Jewish people, and most especially and most famously, the destruction of the first and second temple on the 9th of Av. And so in that we have just had, we've been in this period that's known as the 3 weeks where we've been walking our way slowly to destruction. And then we finish that, we do a collective day of mourning, and then we come to Shabbat, and the rabbis offer us this Shabbat Nachamu, draw comfort. And this week's Haftarah, it begins a series of 7 Haftarot, which are all about comfort, which are promising us that though the world can often be dark, dark days do pass, and there is comfort to be found. And in Isaiah's conception, the languaging for that is that the temple that was destroyed will be rebuilt. So the reason that the destruction of the temple was so tragic for the Jewish people is that the temple was regarded as God's house. God lives down the street, around the corner, over there in that spot, the temple. And if you believe in God, if you believe in a single source, creator, all powerful, then, and if you can stretch that belief to include that all powerful being has an address, it stands to reason that that address shouldn't be vulnerable to destruction by human political forces. What is the point of it being God's house if it can be destroyed? And yet it was destroyed, and it threw the Jewish people into a theological crisis, and it opens for us a set of questions that we're going to open together today, and we're going to see that the Torah itself is wrestling with these questions. We said that if we have this feeling like, wow, it kind of seems like God is mad, that can take us down a road of theodicy, of why do bad things happen to good people. I don't want to go there today. What I want us to consider together is how close or how far must we be from source? How close can we as human beings come? What are the ways that we reach out, that we bridge that gap between source and our feeling of being separate over here, isolated, needing to call out? And then maybe at the end, we'll give a nod to how do we get there? How do we traverse the distance? So I want you to look with me. We're actually going to start in the Haftarah. So I want you to look with me at this excerpt from Isaiah. And if you jump, you can see on the Hebrew side, the Torah doesn't break itself up into Torah portions for us. That is done later by the Masoretic tradition. But the Torah does have some internal breaks in it, and we have one of them here. So if you see, you have really up close to the top, you have a bracket, the round circular letter samech, and another bracket. And the verses that are there, they say, Kol kore bamidbar. There is a voice coming out from the distance. The Hebrew says, clear in the desert a road for the Lord. Kol kore bamidbar, panu derech Adonai. So first of all, this Kol Kore Bamidbar, it should remind us a little bit of Song of Songs, of Kol Dodi Hine Zeba, this sense of a voice that is announcing God's presence. And then Isaiah says, make way, clear a road, almost as though literally there is a divine presence that's coming in such a way that it might travel on a road. Level the wilderness a highway for our God. Let every valley be raised, every hill and mountain made low. Let the rugged ground become level and the ridges become plain. The presence of the Lord shall appear, and all flesh as one shall behold. For the Lord God's self has spoken. Okay, so this is the imagery that the Haftarah gives us. So first of all, I don't know, I don't think we can do questions and answers, but if we were in a room and I could ask you, the Haftarah says, be comforted. So the question is, what is the source of comfort? Okay, what is the source of comfort? The source of comfort here is the arrival of God's presence, that we get comfort by feeling close to God. That is the contention in the Haftarah. Now, if we could really talk and really get to know each other, and I asked you that as a question, we would have a lot of debate about that, right? Some of us would share incredible stories of moments that we have felt close to God, and others of us would say, no, never felt it. No, that idea is offensive. No, it causes problems when we construct the world in such a way that we're waiting for something like a God to come walking down the road, right? So really, really fraught. And yet this is the imagery that the Haftarah gives us, this idea that we find comfort by feeling close to God. In the conception of the Haftarah, I will do a screen share once we move on from these verses. In the conception of the Haftarah, it says there is a voice of God. That voice of God can come down the road, but then it says something very interesting. It says, it refers to God, the God that is coming, as Kvod Adonai. Not God is coming, but the Kavod of God is coming. So this idea of the Kavod of God it's very interesting, and it should be our first indication about the theological wrestling that the rabbis did. And what I'm about to show you is that even the book of Deuteronomy is doing. The book of Deuteronomy itself is really unsure how close people can get to God. It's really unsure about that. And one of the solutions that it finds is this idea of the kavod of God. That whatever God is something, and then as something else, there is the kavod of God. And in Isaiah's conception, the kavod of God needs a road cleared, and the kavod of God can come down the road. Let me pause there. We're at the 15-minute mark. Oh, but now, okay, I'm going to stop the share because I can't see the chat. Let me pause for questions.
If folks have questions, you can put those in the chat directed either to me or to Rabbi Brandis.
You think of questions. I'm going to take us one step further, and Julie will collect them for us, and then I'll stop again when we have a couple and answer them. Okay. So the book of Deuteronomy itself wrestles with this question of how close can we get to God, and we have evidence of that wrestling in this week's parsha, in Parashat Vaetchanan. So, I mean, you tell me. When you want to talk to God, how do you talk to God? How do we talk to God? So in the Jewish conception, right? Like if we weren't meeting here on the computer, but we were meeting in a synagogue, back when we did that kind of thing, the most knee-jerk answer, we talk to God through prayer, right? There's this idea that God is way, way, way out there. And when we want to talk to God, we call out. We call out in prayer. So first of all, I will say that prayer is a really good idea, especially during hard times, and especially during these hard times. When we have so much uncertainty in the world, there's a Hasidic practice that's called hitbodedut. So hitbodedut was sort of the original talk therapy, right? Even in a Freudian analysis context where the analyst sits out of your line of vision and the analysand just speaks. That's what hitbodedut is. Hitbodedut is taking a private space in a beautiful location and just talking and not stopping and letting your prayer come out, and knowing that act, whether it's formulating the words in your own mouth and having them come out of your mouth, or the faith that they are heard, or the possibility that they do indeed transform the fabric of the universe and that they can be answered. All three of those steps. Prayer is good, and it's a good resource for us. But this idea that we call out to God, it's based on a theology, and it's a theology that we meet in this week's Parsha, in the book of Deuteronomy, that God is far away. That God is far away. And so the key word that we have for that is one of the most famous sections of Torah, the Shema, right? This idea when we say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, This phrase, Shema Yisrael, listen up, Israel, it's repeated many times in the book of Deuteronomy, and it indicates for us a theology that says that the closest we get to God is by hearing God's voice, and there's a certain presupposition that that voice is far away. And so if you subscribe to a theology that's a theology of the watchmaker, a creator that set creation in motion and then is elsewhere, prayer is how we traverse that distance between where we are down here and that elsewhere. And so here in the beginning of our Parsha, the Parsha wants to say to us, wants to make this point very clearly, even about the revelation at Sinai. Even about the revelation at Sinai, the closest moment we ever came to God, Deuteronomy wants to tell us clearly, all you did was hear a voice. So this is the first source here. The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You have heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice. God declared to you the covenant that God commanded that you observe, the 10 commandments, and God inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone. At the same time, the Lord commanded me to impart to you the laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you're about to cross into. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Lord your God spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. In case you didn't hear me the first time, let me repeat it the second time in the same set of verses. You saw no shape. So this section of Deuteronomy wants us to know that when we want to draw close to God, it's through an act of listening. The way we communicate is through calling out in prayer. And this presupposes a certain amount of distance between us and the Creator. I think that I saw there was a question. Did I see a question? Do we have questions or we're good? Okay, no, I saw a comment, we're good. Okay, now, the funny thing about this claim that we saw no form and that God is far away is that the next chapter of Deuteronomy says otherwise, says something else. There's a competing tradition in the Torah. The Torah itself is unsure about it. The Torah itself says both it's possible and impossible. It both never happened to anybody and happened to Moses, and collectively as a people. It both could never happen and also did happen. So the next chapter of Deuteronomy says, the Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our fathers that the Lord made this covenant. And here there's this emphasis. There's another internal debate in the Torah about do things happen in multi-generational ways to Jews and for Jews and for everybody. And yet right here in Deuteronomy, Moses wants to emphasize it was us. It's not multi-generational, not the next generation, not the previous, with us, the living, every one of us who's here today, face to face, the Lord spoke to you on the mountain out of the fire. So this is very concrete. This is very concrete. This isn't, right? There's plenty, if we were to study the extended section that describes the revelation, we would see, and I brought you one example here. When scholars look at what happened at Sinai, they basically say these people were worshiping a storm god. And what happened there was a huge thunderstorm. So I could write you poetry, and the Tanakh does write poetry that describes in the abstract a thunderstorm. And yet this language is very concrete. You saw God face to face. So, of course, the Torah is going to reconcile these tensions, and I'm going to offer us one reconciling from the Hasidic tradition. But what's significant for us to know at this point is that there is a conception of a relationship with God that we meet in the Torah that's much closer than this idea of a God who's very far away, to whom we call out in prayer. That we have this theology that we're meeting here is one of immanence. That it's possible to be with God as though we are face to face with the other. And so this section is immediately introducing the 10 Commandments. I brought them for you here down in the next part. And there's a beautiful, beautiful Hasidic teaching that is wrestling with this apparent contradiction. It starts by saying, it quotes the two sections we just quoted. How do you say we saw no form out of the fire? And then later say, we saw God face to face? The answer is that is found in the opening words of the 10 Commandments that you're looking at here. So the first of the 10 Commandments opens with the Hebrew phrase, Anochi Adonai Elohech. Anochi means I am the Lord your God. And then if you just are looking across the first line and you see the 3 of the 4 first words are start with the letter Aleph. And so the Chernobyl Rebbe says the answer to this question is in the Aleph. He says, actually, that which was heard at Sinai was the sound of the Aleph. Now the Aleph, if you know Hebrew, you know Aleph has no sound. So what was heard at Sinai was the sound of silence. I jumped a source, jump back up with me one sec, back up to Exodus 20. At Sinai, tradition, the Torah seems to claim that the people experienced their synesthesia. They had a sensory reversal. This verse from Exodus says, Kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Kol voice, that same voice that's coming, described in Isaiah, the voice of God. Here on Sinai, the people didn't hear the kolot, they saw the kolot. There was a sensory reversal that happens. And this is meant to indicate it's a total experience that overwhelmed the natural neural pathways of the senses. So this Hasidic teaching says they saw the kolot. What kol? The voice is the sound of the Aleph, the sound of silence. What does it mean that they saw it? So the letter Aleph, you're looking at it, can I zoom in? I don't know if I'm gonna lose you if I zoom in. No, it feels too risky. If you look at the letter Aleph, you can see he says the letter Aleph is actually made up of 3 Hebrew letters. It's made up of a Vav that goes on the diagonal, and then a Yud that's the right side up, and a Yud that's upside down. And that this Hebrew letter Aleph is actually 2 Vavs and a Yud, and 2 Vavs and a Yud, you just have to go with me here in our last 4 minutes, 2 Vavs and a Yud is actually the shape of a human face. That a Vav is the center line of the face, and the 2 Yuds are the 2 eyes of the face. And that, what does it mean? That the people saw the Aleph, saw the Kolot, that they actually looked at the other, and they saw the Aleph, they saw the 10 Commandments, all in the face of the other. This is anticipating Levinas for us, right? That seeing that God is experienced in the face of the other. Now, what's so incredible is that this idea of an immanent God, which we're saying is captured by this idea that we could see God face to face, that the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy says, at Sinai, you saw God face to face. So that quote is used in about 3 subjects. We just read it about the people. It is used about Moses in his epithet. At the end of the Torah, it says Moses was the only person ever to have seen God face to face. Even though in the book of Exodus, God explicitly says to Moses, no person can see my face and live, right? But the other person who uses this phrase is Jacob. So Jacob is described as having seen God face to face. But what's incredible is that after Jacob has his midnight wrestling episode, which is another incredible section of Torah to study, that episode in which he wrestles with an angel and he names the place of that incident, Pniel, God's face. So in some way or another, he sees God face to face there. He thinks he does because he names the spot God's face. That episode takes place the night before he reunites with his brother from whom he's been estranged, whom he tricked and stole from. And arguably, he's having nightmares because he's terrified about that reunion. So what's incredible is that when these two brothers who haven't seen each other for more than 20 years reunite the next day, they embrace. And then Jacob looks at him and he says, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. That's what he says. Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. So Jacob takes this idea for us. If at Sinai we have this imagery that maybe Revelation was actually about seeing God in the face of the other, Jacob takes it one step up for us. Not just the other, but your enemy, your brother whom you haven't spoken to for 20 years. That is where you see the face of God. And so we're gonna end here. We're coming to the end of our time. But if our context is Shabbat Nachamu and comfort and our need for comfort, our Parsha offers us two ways of finding it. One is Shema Yisrael. Pray, call out to God. Trust that there is a compassionate ear that hears you and is listening. But the second answer is an answer of imminence, of a direct encounter that feels like seeing face to face, acknowledging that there are real arguments in our tradition that sometimes that happens in the face of the other, in a human face. It's not that we're looking for a mystical experience like the Chernobyler describes with seeing an aleph in someone's face. It's about deeply connecting with another person, a loved one, or someone who you haven't talked to in 20 years, one way or another. So I am sending my blessings from Eretz Israel for comfort this Shabbat, and wishing you from here an early Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for choosing to take this time to study together today.